ladies and gentlemen, here the euro comes.
All the technical decisions about the euro are over, and now is the moment of the emotion.
The introduction of the single currency, the euro, in 11 countries of the European Union on the 1st of January 1999 is more than a milestone in the process of European integration, which, having started soon after the Second World War, has now been continuing for almost half a century. This process is aimed at maintaining peace and stability and fostering prosperity in Europe.
On the eve of its 20th birthday, the euro is at crossroads. The COVID-19 crisis has magnified its birth defects for all to see. But the crisis also offers opportunities for lasting change. Now, with the fiscal union in place, the economic engines of Europe, France and Germany may finally unite what was always meant to be one, politics and economics. The euro may be the most tangible child of European integration, but a love child it is not. Instead, it's a half-built house, suffering from the constant tension between the collective interest of those who share it and their individual national interests. The sheer magnitude of the crisis is forcing a countdown to a moment of truth.
The crisis we have to deal with now is huge, but so is the opportunity for Europe and our responsibility to do the right thing in this situation.
It is often said that to truly understand a story, you have to start from the very beginning. And the story of the euro starts much earlier than you might think.
I was actually a staunch supporter of European integration from an early age. That may have something to do with the fact that I grew up and lived on the French-German border in the vicinity of Strasbourg.
In that sense, I am not a historian, nor a contemporary historian. But unlike many historians and epigones, I was there. That is the big difference. Shortly after the war, the first chairman of the Christian Social Union, one of my predecessors as party leader, who had been in the resistance, said, "We need a common currency, because countries that have a common currency will never again wage war against each other."
I remember once seeing a note that the euro had had strong opposition from a considerable portion of the German business establishment. They were some of Kohl's biggest supporters, so I asked him, "Helmut, why do you want the euro?" It was the most unexpected answer of my life. I want the euro because my brother died in World War II. Everyone in Cole's generation had internalized this. When Carlo Azeglio Ciampi received the Charlemagne Prize, it was Cole who gave the awards speech. He tells the Germans and French present that the roads leading from Aachen to Paris are surrounded by fields full of crosses. And under those crosses there are French and German boys. And we don't even know which ones are French and which ones are German. And in saying this, he's moved to tears and moves everyone in the audience. That's the never again, the moral force that drove the first baby steps of European integration.
J'avais 15 ans à l'époque.
I was just 15 years old at the time, but I followed this debate with an interest that still surprises me today, because I thought back then that it was a great adventure that the European Union would embark on. Werner's plan seemed bold, courageous even, and it gave a boost to the idea of the monetary construction of Europe.
In 1969, the Werner Plan laid the foundations of monetary union. It draws lessons from recent history, as the 20th century had seen 2 world wars that killed over 100 million people. Both were started by Germany. When the bloodshed stopped, the European integration project was born. At its heart was a promise that united the greatest minds of the continent. Never again. They hoped to dissolve the enmity which had started 2 world wars in the space of 1 generation. A new conflict between the centuries-old enemies France and Germany would not only become unthinkable, but materially impossible. Hence, solidarity was at the center of the Schuman Declaration, which has come to be seen as the founding act of the EU.
Europe will not be made all at once or according to a single plan. It will be built through concrete achievements which first create a de facto solidarity.
A few years earlier, in July 1944, in Bretton Woods, USA, delegates from 44 countries congregated to forge a less known, but no less crucial new international institution. It was believed that the economic meltdown in the interwar years had been the root cause of World War II. If the world was to prevent it from happening again, currencies had to be convertible, and nations had to benefit from increasing trade with one another. The International Monetary Fund and the World Bank were born. All currencies would become convertible on the basis of their relationship to the US dollar, which was the only currency still backed directly by gold. Needless to say, most European countries were not comfortable with the supremacy of the dollar. It was seen as an excessive advantage for America. Moreover, the idea of a European single currency had already been around for centuries. The first ever de facto European single currency was born in Florence in 1252. The florin, a gold coin, was accepted all over Europe. In 1958, the Atomium Monument was built in Brussels. A magnified iron crystal, it embodies the Belgian national motto, unity makes strength. It's the symbol of the 50s as an epoch of audacity, with a fervent faith in science as the motor of progress. Around the same time, building work started on the European condominium with the same sense of optimism. A new method of government would bring peace and prosperity for all, just what post-war Europeans craved. Expectations were great. Europe meant modernity and economic recovery. The station Station Europe in Brussels became a utopian destination. To overcome the past failures of national cooperation, the architects of the integration project designed a new type of communal building, with supranational institutions that would protect the collective interest. But the design required the residents to recognize and understand its value. As for the building managers, they faced the Herculean task of ensuring the condominium works for all its residents. After the signature of the Treaty of Rome in 1957 that established the European Economic Community, the unease with the domination of the dollar only grew. Luxembourg's Prime Minister Werner was tasked with devising a plan. The Werner Report was endorsed by all European heads of government in 1972, including those from the 3 countries that planned to join the club in '73. Denmark, Ireland and the UK.
The Werner Plan had foreseen everything. The different stages required the establishment of monetary union. It became the euro, but he called it the euro ore, which means euro gold.
I have directed Secretary Connolly to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold.
Naja, ich habe schon eine Erinnerung daran.
I remember how in the 80s,
Nein, in den 70er
no, the 70s,
Präsident Giscard d'Estaing und der Bundeskanzler Schmidt
President Giscard d'Estaing and Chancellor Schmidt tried, with the snake in the tunnel and with all these different instruments, to solve the currency problem, which had basically become ever more troubling since President Nixon denounced the Bretton Woods system.
Präsident Nixon im Grunde immer problematischer geworden war.
The collapse of the Bretton Woods system in 1971, that was driven by the fact that the loose fiscal policies of the US, including the Vietnam War and the trade deficit, implied that the commitment of pegging the dollar to a fixed gold price and having every country fixing its exchange rates to the US dollar became unsustainable.
What made me take note was the intolerance of France's President Chirac for our behavior. It really struck me. He told me, now stop it. You can't just devalue your currency every time, and in doing so, disrupt a French company and cut into its profits.
Darling, this is your birthday gift.
Oh, Gino, you're so generous.
Since there is a lot of trade between European countries, if suddenly the value of the Italian lira can fall 20–30% relative to the German mark, then that's inconsistent with free trade, because massive devaluation can give you a competitive advantage.
It's a little something specially Italian just for you. A new Fiat 127.
Oh, Gino.
There were some market segments where Italian and French cars were competing neck and neck. The small Renaults, the small Peugeots and so on were battling with ours. From one day to the next, ours would cost 10% less in France because we had devalued the lira.
Car's ready, sir. Oh. Very wise to buy while our money-saving promotion's on. 1,000 miles of free petrol. Cheap finance.
Free petrol? Cheap finance? Oh, very romantic. I'll give you glue to match your eyes.
It is precisely for this reason that the first winning argument to convince European countries of the need for a single currency was that it was indispensable for a properly functioning single market, as it removed the ability of national governments to distort it through currency devaluation.
The all-new Renault 5. What's yours called?
Continuing on that path eventually would have brought us out of Europe, regardless of the creation of the euro. Devaluation was a system for devaluing our people and our country also.
But at the time of the European monetary system from 1979 into the 1990s, we had over 20 realignments, revaluations, devaluations, which were disastrous each time for the countries that had to devalue, and which presented Germany and its exports with a real challenge. And so it became clear, a common European currency without these ups and downs was a good and promising currency for Germany and its exports too.
Luftig und weich. Miele.
My Europeanism has grown through the hope, or perhaps the illusion, that external pressure could positively change my country's morale. What the government fails to do, the external constraint that is, the European Union will do. That was one of the other elements that pushed me strongly towards the euro.
The idea of a currency where you had an independent central bank that was able to behave like the Bundesbank and really control inflation and eliminate that danger of competitive devaluation seemed to people like me as if it solved the problem of our age, namely inflation and monetary instability.
But the European monetary system was no more successful in regulating the markets. National inflation and competitive devaluations kept rocking the European boat. Then, a certain Jacques Delors, former finance minister of France, was appointed president of the European Commission in 1985. It proved to be a turning point. Delors was to take two major historic leaps forward: the completion of the single market and the plan for a single currency. He even reformed the voting procedure in the European Council so that no one member state could act alone to derail the process.
The TUC put years of hostility towards the European community firmly behind it today and welcomed the President of the European Commission to its conference in Bournemouth. Jacques Delors was there to urge trade unions to make the most of the single European trade market.
Union leaders here nickname him Frère Jacques, Brother Jack. But even French socialist politician Jacques Delors wouldn't have got a hearing in recent years from a TUC critical of the common market. Now union leaders see European attitudes as more acceptable than British government ones.
Then I knew we are now entering a crucial phase. But we didn't know at the time if we would be successful or not. It took nearly 10 years until the preparations led to success.
On November the 9th, 1989, 5 days after 500,000 people gathered in East Berlin in a mass protest, the Berlin Wall crumbled. Just 2 weeks later, then West German Chancellor Helmut Kohl came up with a 10-point plan to reunite the brothers who had been separated for 45 years. He didn't consult his European allies nor his coalition partners in Bonn. Most are unaware of the crucial impact that those dramatic events would have on the birth of the euro. Within days, euphoria had given way to concern as leaders contemplated the imminent return of a mighty united Germany right in the middle of Europe. Recently released government communiques show just how rattled France and Britain's leaders were. President Mitterrand feared the return of the bad Germans, while Margaret Thatcher was profoundly hostile to reunification. Famously, Italy's Prime Minister Giulio Andreotti joked that he loved Germany so much that he preferred to have two of them. When Helmut Kohl arrived at the EC summit in December 1990 in Strasbourg, he received a frosty reception.
The fear of a great Germany has always stayed with us. Let's say it was more instinct than reason. And yet, there were sufficient reasons to believe that a united Germany's economic might was enough to destabilize the integrated market that we had created.
Gli equilibri del mercato integrato che in un modo o nell'altro avevamo creato.
And therefore, in Mitterrand's mind, we see the euro taking shape.
Venne l'euro.
Days are grey and the nights are there.
After some initial hesitation and dithering, President Mitterrand took the lead. And so France in the 90s once again became the mother of European integration. It did so to address its anxieties about its political and economic relations with Germany, as it did soon after the war.
I think the story that Kohl's approval of the monetary union was the price for Mitterrand's approval of German reunification, implying that a deal was struck, is nonsense.
Kohl was convinced that the single currency was necessary to anchor Germany definitively in Europe, the European Germany that Thomas Mann longed for in 1953. But at the time of unification, Kohl said, we must do it now, because once Germany is unified, there will be a strong temptation for Germany to return to its Sonderweg, its solitary and particular path, the one that led to the creation of the German empires, that led to Nazism. He won the elections and the Maastricht Treaty began to be negotiated. Besides, he said this long afterwards when he was retired. If I had called a referendum on the euro, I would have lost it.
What is true is that the Deutschmark was a successful, proud and stable currency, and it was part of the identity of the Germans in the terrible period after the Second World War. And it was not easy to convince the majority of Germans that a European currency is just as stable and in the interest of Germany in Europe. But of course, we had to promise the Germans, and we kept that promise, that the euro would be as stable as the Deutschmark. And if you look at the inflation rate since 1999, inflation has been lower since the euro has been introduced than it was in Deutschmark times.
Since the 60s, there was a secret lying at the hearth of the Euro project, something that was never really addressed or explained to the people. In Europe, there were huge differences between the wealthy north and the poorer south. Thus, it was not an optimal currency area as defined by the Nobel laureate economist Robert Mundell in 1961. His theory clearly states that you can have fantastic advantages by having a single market and a single currency, but to make it work, you first need two things. First, you need a considerable common budget that in case of turbulences, such as a financial crisis or an epidemic, could help stabilize countries which got in trouble. And second, you need all countries to converge to a similar economic level. So it was a well-known fact since the 60s that without those elements, the Eurozone was flawed. But politicians didn't have the courage to explain this to their voters. Neither to the Germans that there was a trade-off between the wealth created by the euro and the need to support the weaker South, nor to the Southerners that Euroclub membership implied painful reforms. In the Maastricht Treaty, this gigantic political hot potato was swept under the carpet.
I was happy that Europe was going in the direction of greater integration, but then I was aware that this was not, formally speaking, from an economist point of view, an optimal currency area, and therefore there will be significant strains and bumps down the road.
The common budget should have been at least 7% of the common area GDP in order to be effective. That's more than 5 times the size of the current existing EU budget. Without these key elements, the Eurozone was not an optimal currency area. It was, in other words, a half-built house, unable to withstand a storm without threatening to collapse. And the storm would come.
Kohl believed in it. He wanted the political completion of the Union. But, and that's the point, when they were in Maastricht, even the most pro-Europeans like him understood that if they wanted to complement the euro with what the euro needed, the euro would not have been approved.
Con ciò di cui l'euro aveva bisogno, non sarebbe stato approvato neanche l'euro. Questo lo disse Kohl.
He said this explicitly, and then came out of Maastricht saying only, there is a lack of political union and economic and fiscal integration, but the euro will make it inevitable. History would later show that the euro made that union necessary, but not inevitable. Trouble comes when what is necessary does not arrive.
On the 7th of February 1992, history is made in a small Dutch town. The Treaty on the European Union was signed in Maastricht after 18 difficult months of negotiations. The new European Central Bank and a single European currency were to see the light of day in 1999. It reaffirmed the objective of a political union, and the European Community was symbolically renamed the European Union. Very few people realized what was really happening behind the scenes. But the notorious Maastricht criteria agreed there were to have an extraordinary impact on the lives of millions of European citizens.
Of course, I fought hard to get on that first Euro train. I always had the conviction that had my government remained in power long enough, we would have measured up to the great European challenge, because the system had great flaws, but also a lot of potential. And because joining the euro felt like a real national challenge.
In
Italy, we were actually ready to board the euro on the second train and not the first. Then there was a meeting in Valencia with Prime Minister Prodi and his Finance Minister Ciampi. And Italy found out that Spain wanted to join immediately. And so, Prodi came out of the tête-à-tête with PM Aznar and told his finance minister, you have to change the budget right away.
The Valencia episode has become infamous in Italian politics. According to the rumors, Prodi actually intended for the Mediterranean countries to join together at a later date. But after the Spanish Prime Minister rejected the idea in an interview with the Financial Times, it became impossible for Italy, a proud founding member of the European project, to be beaten to Euro membership by the Spanish. Romano Prodi, however, still disagrees with that version of events.
There was a great international misunderstanding about the problem when I went to the meeting with Aznar in Spain, in Valencia, just before the entry into the euro. After our meeting, he gave an interview to the Financial Times, super fast, like he was, like a ferret. Fortunately, a few days earlier, I had sent a letter to Kohl and Chirac, saying that Italy's government programme was to get into the euro with the first group.
era entrare nell'euro col primo gruppo.
It was an incredibly difficult battle.
È stata una battaglia durissima.
As far as Italy was concerned, Romani Prodi and others know better how difficult it was in Italy. But we also know that with the aim of joining the single currency, major reform efforts were made in Italy under the responsibility of Prodi and Ciampi. And that's why I, as chairman of the CDU-CSU faction, was a committed advocate of Italian membership from the very beginning, because I have always said that we cannot take a substantial step in Europe without Italy, which is a founding country of the European Union, something you cannot say about Greece.
C'è stato un momento addirittura emotivo.
There was even an emotional moment because I wanted the tax for Europe and I called it a tax for Europe, and everybody told me I was crazy. But I wanted it first for a more objective reason that I had. Secondly, because I was convinced that the country would have understood, and it did. When everyone was against us at the beginning, there was an Italian-French summit in Chambéry.
Un vertice italo-francese a Chambéry.
Afterwards, we held the usual press conference.
La solita conferenza stampa che si fa alla fine di questi vertici.
A French journalist asked Chirac, why make these joint statements when, in a few months, France will be in the euro and Italy will not?
Perché fate queste dichiarazioni di lavoro in comune quando fra pochi mesi la Francia sarà nel...
We were in the middle of a battle. I had a moment of true fear. And then Chirac, with his beautiful French pomposity, raises his head and says, "Sir, there is no Europe without Italy." At Dublin Castle, fierce negotiations drag into the night. Germany fears that the southern countries would weaken the euro and wants tougher rules for entry and heftier fines for breaking them. But the Italian team is led by a highly respected economist in Carlo Azeglio Ciampi, who had just managed to halve the enormous Italian deficit. At his side, there was a bright civil servant destined to play a crucial role in the life of the currency about to be born, Mario Draghi.
When I spoke with the Italian Minister of Finance at that time, Carlo Ciampi, a remarkable man, a great man, he told me, "You can rest easy. Teo, we will meet the criteria in Italy."
Wir werden in Italien die Kriterien erfüllen.
And so I thought to myself, if this old, experienced man says that, then there is a real chance.
But let's be honest, what was decisive was the European prestige that Ciampi enjoyed. The race to be in the first train to join the euro was tough, but the consequences of being left out were worse. Ironically, it fell to the UK, which, like Denmark and Sweden, had not entered the race for political reasons, to break the news on which countries had made it. The suspense was high for the announcement of the lucky winners. Who is in, who is out?
The recommendation of the Council is that 11 member states, Belgium, Germany, Spain, France, Ireland, Italy, Luxembourg, Netherlands, Austria, Portugal and Finland fulfill the necessary conditions for economic and monetary union. This is not simply the end of a process, it is the beginning of a new era for Europe.
Si imbarcò l'Europa
So, Europe embarked on the euro adventure, having prepared nothing to deal with the effects of the substantial differences in the economy and public finance between the countries that would take part. This explains much of what would happen after 2008.
And then came the time to pick the perfect baby name. No easy feat for 11 fathers, no mother, and an obligation to be historically and culturally neutral. The name became a matter of state to be tackled in Madrid in 1995. The existing currency unit was the ECU, European Currency Unit, which was spelt like the écu, a medieval French currency. The Germans would never agree to swap their Deutschmarks for a currency which sounded that French.
Deutschmark was not possible. Mark might still have been accepted by the Danes and the Finns, but nobody else. Pounds were not possible either. Lira we did not want, neither shillings. And so I thought about it, and that's when I got the idea. Francs, I thought to myself, that is acceptable for France. And then Felipe Gonzalez came and said, no, I cannot accept that. Here in Spain they would be called Franco, and we don't want that anymore. Then I strained my head once again and thought, there is Eurocard, there is Eurocopter, there is quite a lot, even Euro-crisis, a German economist once said. Then I thought, why not omit the second word, and you have Euro. And then my friend Jean-Claude Juncker said, but euro doesn't sound very erotic. Thereupon I looked at him urgently and said, Jean-Claude, you are not the youngest either. The main thing is that it sounds erotic. That is enough. And so it was decided unanimously.
Una moneta di nome euro. Saranno famosi.
Mostriamo il nostro valore.
Per una missione che sembrava impossibile.
Sostituiremo 12 miliardi di banconote e 70 miliardi di monetine nazionali.
Eccoci.
E le lire?
Andranno a cambiarsi. Una moneta di nome euro. L'appuntamento più atteso. Una storia di unione e di amicizia. Dalle più grandi stelle del continente, prossimamente nei portafogli di tutti gli europei.
Jacques Delors once said that the European project is like a bicycle. If you stop pedaling, you fall. It was in the bicycle capital of Europe that the next stage in the race towards the euro would take place, the birth of the European Central Bank. The Amsterdam Treaty, signed in 1997, gives the ECB its steely independence and a very peculiar status. It's a central bank without a government. Germany is therefore its biggest shareholder, but the German influence on the ECB always went further than that. In fact, the ECB was modelled on the most successful national central bank in Europe, the Bundesbank. The Bundesbank's influence on the ECB is most evident in its conviction that central bankers are the guardians of the value of money and should resist the predatory tendencies of politicians to print cash without limits. But this credo was forged in another epoch in German history, in the trauma of the hyperinflation of the Weimar Republic that in the German psyche is still, questionably, associated with the birth of Nazism. Central banks in the 21st century will, however, face radically different challenges. New Year's Eve, 1998.
8, 7, così, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
As the clocks strike midnight, the euro becomes the official currency for banks and trade in the Eurozone. It was a moment of extraordinary collective pride, amplified by the satisfaction of having proved wrong the naysayers and doommongers, especially in the UK and US, who were betting that the euro would never see the light of the day, and if it did, would suffer a very sudden death. They were to be proven wrong, over and over again.
No worries, everything has been planned meticulously, but being prepared is one thing. Seeing the baby being born in great health, lively and with the right weight is quite another. I share this glory with other people. You don't build Europe on your own. It's a large project and everyone gives their best. I was lucky enough to be part of it during good periods and able to initiate good things. I did not forget that this project started in 1948.
It was indeed a moving moment, because decades of trying to create something like this had come to fruition.
When the first quotation of the euro exchange rate against the dollar was popping on the screen, which was 1.1686. For me, this was very exciting. I looked at the screen this morning. Guess what the value of the euro in terms of dollars is today? It's 1.18. So in 20 years of time, basically, we were able to keep up with the dominant currency in the world, and which is a lot of trust in the dollar. So I think we basically delivered.
I'd now like to turn to Romano Prodi, who, as everybody knows, is the former Prime Minister of Italy.
After the euro, it's dangerous to be out of the European group, you know. So the real consequence is that Europe is taking a new momentum. You can't give a quantity to that, you know, but the idea you feel it.
Still, there was persistent skepticism in America and the UK. Interestingly, that was not at all the case in China.
I cannot forget that when the euro arrived, I remember meeting with the Chinese leaders. Very interesting, because they were interested in nothing but the euro. The question was, will you really share one currency? Will you really have the same banknotes? Would we be able to buy it as a reserve currency? If the euro can exist next to the dollar, will there also be place for the renminbi? Because we don't want a unipolar world, but a multipolar world. And we will have in our reserves as many dollars as euros. And they did start to buy euros. The 2008 crisis hampered this process. But had it not been for that, China would have had as many euros as dollars, because it was in China's interest. And it still is in China's interest.
Ireland's change to the single currency, the euro, is taking shape. On the 1st of January 1999, the euro will come into being. 3 years later, on the 1st of January 2002, the euro will come into our pockets. Further information will be made available by the Euro Changeover Board of Ireland, helping you make the change.
It was difficult for the representatives of the United States to understand that Europe would have a common currency. I remember once asking Bob Rubin, whom I held in high esteem and with whom I had a very good relationship, could you not say a positive word about the euro? It would do me good in Germany. And he said, Theo, I like you. If I say nothing, it's better, because I do not have a lot of faith that this will work.
And Alan
Greenspan once said, the prospects for it are zero, or below zero. But I am convinced that the global monetary system, which used to be determined only by the dollar, is now a different system. If you asked Alan Greenspan, what about the dollar? Then he would answer, it's my currency and your problem.
It's my currency and your problem.
I don't think the representatives of the United States would say that anymore.
The euro was made to last. Its banknotes make use of cutting-edge technology to fight counterfeiters. The only snag was the 500 euro note. Due to its low weight-to-value ratio, it became so popular amongst criminals that it was discontinued in 2018, though it is still legal tender. All in all, it has proven to be a very resilient currency. It has often proven its critics wrong and now competes with the dollar, enhancing the economic weight of Europe in the world. While the euro has gained in standing internationally, its worst enemies hail from within Europe itself. The failure to complete the political integration and the lack of democratic accountability has led some people to feel that the euro was done to them and not by them. They may have a case.
Euro banknotes made to last.
In 2001, the design for the euro notes was finally unveiled. It had been a long and fractious process involving politicians, historians, designers and psychologists. Europe was not born yesterday, and so the many competing perceptions of history and culture eventually led to the euro notes being adorned with imaginary architecture. The design by Austrian banker Robert Calini, with windows and gates on one side and bridges on the other, was chosen by public survey. Every building represents a different epoch from the Romans to modernity, but none is based on an existing structure. That way, they can be rich in symbolism, whilst also being completely immune to cultural appropriation by any specific country. The preamble of the Greek tragedy took place in 2001, just before the euro arrived in the pockets of Europeans. The global investment banking and securities firm Goldman Sachs helped the Greek state fudge its numbers so that Greece could meet the Maastricht criteria for entry. Greece got into the euro. Goldman Sachs allegedly pocketed $500 million from the deal. The Financial Times wrote at the time, it was ouzo all around. In reality, it was the Greek people who were the ones left to foot the bill.
Very simply, Greece cheated. The Greeks admitted it themselves. I experienced this firsthand. I was there. I was president of the Commission, and I said, we need a court of auditors. They told me no, because between France and Germany and the Stability Pact, it wasn't necessary. We lacked supervision, and if there is no supervision, who cares if you commit a bigger or smaller sin?
To admit Greece into the monetary union too early was a serious mistake on the part of the governments at that time.
Even within Greece, critics abounded. One of them was the renowned economist and future finance minister, Yanis Varoufakis.
I campaigned against Greece's entry into the Eurozone. It was a spectacular error, and Schäuble and Weigel were right. Countries like Greece should never have entered.
It was a big mistake, and with time things got worse, because Greece continued to tell tall tales. The Greek crisis started in 2010-2011, but lasted until 2015, when I was the president of the Commission. As president of the Commission, I did all I could to keep Greece in the Eurozone.
You know, it's one thing to say we shouldn't have gotten in. It's quite another to say we should get out. Because when you get out, you don't return to where you would have been had you not entered. It's a bit like an Indiana Jones movie. You know, Indiana Jones rushes into a castle, the bridge behind him collapses. If he reverses course, he dies.
Alors ça y est, l'euro, ça va se faire? Et en douceur, à ce que je vois.
T'imagines? La même monnaie pour 350 millions d'Européens.
Et d'Européennes. D'ailleurs, ça devrait créer des liens.
T'as vu ça? Plus de change, moins de frais. C'est classe pour voyager.
Et tu m'emmènes où?
Pour exporter aussi. Tout compte fait, ça devrait doper les entreprises.
Et puis en francs ou en euros, une laitue sera toujours aussi verte.
Moi, celui que je préfère, c'est le billet bleu.
Tu vois, mon bonhomme, les francs de ton compte épargne, hop, ça deviendra des euros.
À votre tour de tout savoir sur l'euro, retirez le guide L'Euro et moi dans les mairies, les postes et les banques. Ou renseignez-vous au 0800 01 2002. L'euro fait la force.
On the 1st of January 2002, the new banknotes and coins were introduced. Across Europe, people queued for hours at cash points to be among the first to have the coins and banknotes in their pockets. Initially, there was Europhoria, but it quickly turned into complacency, especially in countries such as Italy, where the exchange rate between the old lira and the euro was nothing to be merry about.
Abbiamo speso I primi euro.
We spent our first euros in Vienna with the Austrian Chancellor Schussel. We bought a bouquet of flowers from a street stall for our wives. You have no idea what a street party it was.
Era una festa, lei non ha idea di che festa era. Voglio dire, attenzione che c'è stata.
There were a lot of emotions there. It was emotional. But you know, even emotions fade. Even a beautiful marriage, if it's not taken care of, may end up going bad.
A las puertas del siglo XXI, un gran cambio va a abrirnos a todos las puertas de una nueva Europa más próspera y competitiva. El euro, la nueva moneda europea. Con el euro se abre para todos un mundo lleno de oportunidades. El euro está en puertas. Euro, el valor de la Unión.
Allora, 0,52 moltiplico per 1936,27, 5 per 7 è 35, scrivo 5 porto 3, prendo 2 cannoli, mangio I cannoli, più 3 cornetti.
Io vado in macchina, ce la fai per giovedì?
Giovedì, venerdì, adesso...
Fa 1000 lire.
E io che ho detto?
Togli 3 zeri e dividi a metà, per semplicità.
Ma va? E con la marmellata è uguale, non...
After the Iraq War, a second whammy hit the euro, and the efforts to reinforce the architecture, which was left half-built at Maastricht. In 2005, the treaty establishing a constitution for Europe was rejected by 55% of the voters in France, followed soon after by the Dutch.
The name we had to give the final document, Treaty Establishing a Constitution for Europe, is enough to tell you the story. Any first-year law student knows that if it is a treaty, it is not a constitution, and if it is a constitution, it is not a treaty. We had created a perfect hermaphrodite, which in part is still present in the Lisbon Treaty. So we are as hermaphroditic as we were then.
Source des résultats de ce référendum, les Français rejettent la Constitution européenne. Le non l'emporte largement.
The rejection of the Constitution sends a very precise message. Every country works for itself. The banks even more so, because there was no supervising authority.
Non hanno mica un'autorità superiore. Chi è che stava pensando?
Who cared if Paribas and Deutsche Bank were lending too much money? Nobody.
Eravamo nel momento.
This was the historic moment where Europe had put its integration into reverse gear.
Aveva cominciato la marcia indietro.
In the early 2000s, money was cheap. Euros were raining from the sky, but so were dollars and pounds. The euro had the misfortune of being born at exactly the same time as the biggest credit bubble the world has ever seen. Eurozone countries were able to build massive deficits, but so did other countries who were not in the euro, such as Iceland. There was a massive credit binge. Housing bubbles started to grow, mainly in Ireland and Spain. Italy and Greece, meanwhile, went on a public spending spree.
The markets believed it. They lent money to Greece at the same rate as Germany. Can you imagine that? The same interest rate as Germany. I mean, at some point you have to be rational and say, that's not possible.
To design the currency and to adjust to the currency had not been done. There wasn't a common European banking supervision system to regulate banks and to prevent excesses. Countries hadn't adjusted to the loss of the exchange rate as a mechanism, but also hadn't adjusted to the need to control their economies in new ways.
This loss of control was not immediately evident while the economy was still booming. But it wouldn't take long until the next bubble burst and caught the Eurozone off guard.
I very remember being in Davos in 2006 at the World Economic Forum, and there was a panel on whether there were risks to the European Monetary Union. Trichet was there, the Italian finance minister Tremonti was there, and I said that there were vulnerabilities building up in Europe, in the Eurozone. So I said in 5 years you could have a crisis within the Eurozone. And I do remember that the Italian finance minister Tremonti got really upset while I was talking. He interrupted me and he said to me, go back to Turkey, because I was born in Istanbul. Nobody was listening, and this is 2006.
After the collapse of subprime mortgages and Lehman Brothers in the United States, any hopes that Europe would escape the brunt of the financial crisis were quickly dispelled. One problem was that internationally at the time, there was a commonly held belief that the financial markets are able to regulate everything. Then we discovered that this was a fantasy.
That is why the European Monetary Union was much weaker. When the financial crisis from the United States and from Lehman Brothers and from the
In retrospect, very irresponsible behavior of the entire financial sector, the big banks, also including the German and European banks, spilled over, and then we understood the whole weakness of the euro system, and suddenly the Lehman Brothers crisis became a euro crisis.
Once again, the politicians did nothing because the markets fell asleep. But those who were asleep were not the political actors. In fact, politicians took advantage of it. They said to themselves, why would I make any effort if the markets go bust? If you can pick up the jam jar and eat from it without your mum stopping you, you'll eat the whole jar. That's the rule. That's the way life works. Greece was partying for 10 years. They woke up with a hangover and it was brutal. At the end, boom, everything collapses.
You had 3 episodes. The subprime, first episode, epicenter in the US. Second episode, Lehman Brothers, and an immediate threat of collapse, epicenter in the US. Second episode up to end of 2009. Then you had a third episode. The third episode was the sovereign risk crisis. I remember the time when Ben Bernanke pointed his finger on me and said, Jean-Claude, now it's your turn.
As the financial crisis turned into a debt crisis, European leaders muddled through from summit to summit, devising responses that were always too little, too late, and raised the cost for all. At the G4 summit in Paris, President Sarkozy launched the idea of a new Bretton Woods to fix the broken international financial system. Everyone shook on it, but the initiative sank almost immediately as everyone turned inwards to focus on saving their own banks.
There we were at the Eurogroup, repairing a plane in flight that was on fire. It's easy to say today that we didn't get everything right at the time, but we did it. We fixed a plane that was on fire in mid-air. That is beyond the capabilities of even the best engineers.
At that point in time, I had the misfortune of becoming Minister of Finance.
When the great crisis came, we found ourselves swept up by in the waves without a paddle, without rafts, and without so much as a life jacket. And yet, between all our errors and limitations, a new instrument was created in the form of the European Stability Mechanism.
That analogy was used widely in analysis of what was going on in the euro. It seemed like European leaders were sleepwalking towards the potential collapse of the euro.
When you build something new, you can never foresee everything that could happen in the future. If we could, we would be godlike and would know everything. We do not know everything. At that time, 1989, 1990, and 1997, 1998, we did what was necessary and right. I do not believe that the euro has birth defects. They were educational defects.
Europe fails when the euro fails. Europe wins when the euro wins.
Enter Super Mario. The Italian economist Mario Draghi takes the reins of the ECB. In 2011, the euro is in free fall. A never-ending series of bailouts has produced no results. The politicians are unable to defend the euro. The markets are intent in destroying it. Then Draghi has an idea. It's July 2012. Dark clouds have been gathering over the Eurozone for more than 3 years, ready to burst and bury the currency union. Then Draghi utters 3 words worth trillions of euros. Overnight, the speculative attacks on the euro stop.
There's another message that I want to tell you today, is that within our mandate, the ECB is ready to do whatever it takes to preserve the euro. And believe me, it will be enough.
And as he said that back then, whatever it takes, that was necessary and the right thing to do. It will go down as a significant sentence in the history of currencies and financial policy.
Very simply, he said, "I am like the Federal Reserve," and they stopped. Nobody dares attack the Federal Reserve.
It was a genius solution by Mario Draghi because it didn't actually cost the European Central Bank at the time any money, but it provided the politicians with enough of a way through to convince their electorates that they were not just sending German taxpayer money to subsidize criminals in Greece.
It is true that Mario Draghi took the lead because the political response was insufficient.
He just made a program to say, if you attack the debts, I'll buy them back, even at a loss. I'll buy them back and everything that's lying around on the markets. That's all. And he didn't spend a penny.
Since the Germans have always been against essentially a fiscal backstop, a fiscal union that they worry will become a transfer union, transferring the risk to the German taxpayer, then in my view the German could not say 9 no to a fiscal backstop and say 9 no to a monetary backstop. And Mario Draghi could do what he did because he had effectively a good relation with Angela Merkel, and Angela Merkel realized that in the absence of a fiscal backstop, a monetary backstop was necessary for the survival of the Eurozone.
My criticism of Draghi had always been that I had told him that with his excessive interpretation of the mandate of the European Central Bank, he made it much easier for the member states not to do what they have to do, namely, to enact reforms. And I remain critical of this.
Nämlich Reformen zu machen. Und bei der Kritik an Draghi bleibe ich auch.
Monetary policies may achieve quite a lot, but not everything. The ECB cannot relieve governments of their responsibility to do their homework and strengthen the competitiveness of their individual countries. And this is why Mario Draghi, in many sessions of the European Council, time and time again reminded the member states to live up to their responsibilities.
My goal has always been to comply with the mandate enshrined by the treaty, pursued in total independence and carried out through an institution that has developed into a modern central bank capable of managing any challenge. And it has been a privilege and an honor to have the opportunity to do so. Thanks. Thank you.
Germany, followed by most European countries, even from outside the Eurozone, embarked on draconian austerity programs. By contrast, the US launched a massive fiscal stimulus and rebounded. But in Europe, the recession turned into a depression with catastrophic consequences for the people. In hindsight, most believe austerity to have been counterproductive, but the consequences are still with us. China went on a European shopping spree. Unemployment rose, inequalities deepened, and anti-EU parties' popularity soared.
I think the big mistake politically was that they started austerity too soon, which also restrained the European economic recovery, but also alienated a lot of electorates. The second mistake was that they treated the economic problems of the members of the euro as being essentially national problems rather than collective problems.
No country was hit harder by austerity than Greece. Unemployment was at more than 25% as the Troika, consisting of the EU Commission, ECB and IMF, called for painful reforms to make the Greek economy more competitive. The euro came to be seen as a rod the financial institutions used to beat Greece into submission. Even the return of the old currency, the drachma, was back on the table. Greece's young Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras was prepared to let it come to that. Instead of accepting the bailout from Brussels and enacting the necessary reforms, he chose to call a referendum. When the Greek people rejected the Troika's measures, the crisis came to a head. Greece was in danger of becoming the first member state to drop out of the euro.
The Commission is prepared for everything. We have a Grexit scenario, prepared in detail. We have a scenario as far as humanitarian aid is concerned. And we have, and that's the scenario I most prefer, a scenario how to deal with the problem now, keeping Greece as a member of the euro area.
Several governments, including the German government, wanted to temporarily exclude Greece from the eurozone. I rejected that idea because I thought it was a dangerous path that the Germans, the Dutch, the Slovaks, the Slovenes and others wanted to take. I told myself at the time that if Greece was forced to leave the eurozone, it would have given the whole world the impression that the euro was not a lasting invention, but a momentary fad that was open for debate.
And that's what it was about. Greece had to undertake reforms to become competitive. And either Greece does that, which is what Tsipras eventually did under pressure, or Greece has to do them under the pressure of a temporary suspension of their euro membership.
That was traumatic for Europe, the austerity moment. Public opinion in Germany, the Netherlands and Sweden was volatile.
Tutta l'opinione pubblica interna tedesca, olandese, svedese, che su questo.
What I was saying is that the Greek problem will only cost 30 billion euros to solve. But there were elections in North Rhine-Westphalia, and I understand very well that the Chancellor had her back against the wall.
Io capisco benissimo che la cancelliera aveva le spalle legate, no?
However, it was an historical error justified by internal political problems. An historic error, and the 30 billion became 300 billion in 3 months, and the breakup of the euro began. It is obvious that when you face a crisis, solidarity breaks down. For understandable reasons of internal politics, European unity collapsed. And then the anti-European spirit prevails. There was a time when bringing down the Berlin Wall was unthinkable. The next wall we will bring down is that of Brussels, giving back to the European people the right to work, the right to life, to health, to security.
Il diritto alla vita, il diritto alla salute, il diritto alla sicurezza.
The Brussels Wall. I won't say bulldozing it, or they say I'm a bad person.
Thus,
the emergence of authoritarian populists could lead to the disappearance of the euro. Some guy says, listen, we won't take that. The Krauts are trying to dominate Europe. Let's leave.
So, Mr. Tsipras, the euro and austerity are Siamese twins. That's the reality. And you won't be able to get your people to escape austerity if you don't allow them to escape the euro. What I thought was that Greece must, in agreement with the European institutions, in a concerted manner, quietly organize, get out of this iron jaw that the euro represents for all the countries of the South.
Europe in the 21st century will have a form where, of course, member states will retain a large part of state sovereignty, but they have long since submitted other parts to Europe, because the world in the 21st century no longer allows for full sovereignty for any European state.
The Germans had understood it before and continue to understand it even now, even though the Italians have always seen Schäuble as a guard dog, a bogeyman. He always understood this. Those who did not understand it will not necessarily understand it in the future. The important thing is to know that the populists are there, and they will continue to be there, to throw a spanner in the works. They are just waiting for an opportunity to resurface and wreak havoc. Before COVID-19, this phenomenon seemed to be on the verge of taking the pole position in the leadership of Europe.
Di conquistare la pole position nella guida dell'Europa.
For 20 years, through a never-ending series of EU summits, Europe has been waiting for EU leaders to do one simple thing: commit to stand by each other in solidarity. Solidarity has always been a key principle of the EU, but one it has seldom lived up to. At a time of crisis, solidarity means giving the euro the credibility of the entire bloc, the power to issue common bonds to back common debt, like in the US. The lessons of the financial crisis could not have been clearer. Supranational measures are required in order to stop the downward spiral. Then, in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic in May 2020, Germany and France finally took the unprecedented step to announce a common recovery fund backed by common debt.
Long answers must be discussed, because Europe must be developed further. That's all I have to say, and thus I give the word to Paris.
What we are proposing together for the first time, France and Germany together, to the 27 member states, is on the one hand to decide all together to raise common debt financing on the markets, and to use these 500 billion euros of aid, which will have to be repaid, as the Chancellor reminded us, to use it to provide funding that will be targeted primarily at the sectors most affected by the health and economic crisis and the region most impacted by the crisis. And therefore, to accept real transfers and a real common strategy to complete our European budget. This is a major step.
And if France and Germany join forces now, take the initiative to do what is necessary in the crisis, and also set a new course in the sense of a sensible climate policy, promoting digitization, then I believe this is the right way forward.
Dann glaube ich, ist das der richtige Weg.
The time has come to turn our backs on the surfeits of a crazy consumer society which squandered its assets and polluted its environment.
In this sense, the coronavirus brought back a collective discourse after the seismic shock of the pandemic, which no one could blame Greece or Italy or anyone else for. COVID-19 was everywhere.
But as we do, let us be wary of improvised remedies prompted by national self-interest. They'll lead to our downfall, like too many tranquilizers.
I still believe that it was a historic intuition that we can only play a key role in today's world if we work together.
We must get together to build a more human and hence happier future.
Today, with the triumphant recovery fund, we have a kind of euro bond system. The differences are minimal. The Germans insist on the differences because they don't like to admit that they have been convinced to issue common bonds.
Merkel immediately understood that if she didn't agree to swiftly help the countries economically most affected by the coronavirus crisis, it would mean the explosion of Europe. And who would suffer most? We. So Italy, France, Spain for sure. But for Germany, it would have been disastrous because a new Deutschmark would have gained 30 to 40% against the euro. Goodbye to German trade surpluses. Adieu, German wealth.
Adieu la richesse allemande. Sarà la prima volta che l'Europa.
It will be the first time that Europe will adopt a common debt for the expenses of some countries without placing the burden on those same countries. Someone said that this is the first Hamilton moment in Europe. And they're right.
What's going on in Europe? It's as if the 12 countries of the European community are having a revolution, a peaceful one. They're working to make their group of countries with a population of 325 million into a single economic area, like the United States of America in a way.
A historic breakthrough, a profound transformation. But is it the birth of the European nation as it once was the birth of the United States? The Recovery Fund moment has been compared to the turning point in American history when in 1791 the first Treasury Secretary, Alexander Hamilton, established common debt and common borrowing for the US, propelling the newborn dollar towards future greatness. But is it really the moment of truth that the euro has been waiting for 20 years?
What is it that the dollar covers? The US government bonds. The euro has been around for almost 20 years without European securities, dancing back and forth from Italian securities to German securities and French securities. Here we begin to create that common structure that, due to COVID, has now become inevitable.
I think that this may actually be the formative event in the life of the euro, which convinces the northern wealthy countries that actually they benefit from the prosperity of the whole eurozone. And I think they will learn that it's not that expensive. In other words, that it's affordable, it's in their benefit, and the trade-off of not doing it is a Great Depression that could last for decades.
In a twist of fate, the savior of the euro, Mario Draghi, ended up at the helm of the Italian government in February 2021, as the Eurozone's third biggest economy found itself in the midst of a severe economic crisis induced by the pandemic. Too often in the euro story, changes of government have caused a stop-and-go approach. Nowhere more so than in Italy. Not this time. Draghi's leadership could well prove to have a lasting impact on the Eurozone and push it towards what it was always meant to be, a fully functioning monetary and economic union. The message he delivered in his inaugural speech to Parliament certainly suggests this.
To support this government means to support the decision to join the euro. It means the prospect of an ever closer European Union. An ever closer union, which will arrive at a common budget fit to support countries at moments of recession.
The euro at 20 is not quite what it used to be. It keeps evolving over time as it has to adapt to our turbulent modern age to survive. To help it continue to do that, it needs and deserves democratic institutions that can lead the way.